So last week we dedicated the Shiur to the Hatzlacha of the young couple, Rabbi Binyamin Rosengarten's daughter, who built a Weiss name we saw last week. So with the lack of your presence, I said usually we dedicate the Shiur a lot of Shleim Alei Iluin Yishmas, but this time we dedicated the Shiur to a happy event, to a young couple that's building a Weiss Godel B'Yisrael, and it's an opportunity now that you're here again. Ahertzach Mazel Tov, B'Shem Kol HaTzibur, B'Shem Kol HaKol HaKodesh. You should see so much nachas. So today's Shiur is a real yeshivish sugya. It is a Shiur which would be more appropriate to say in a yeshivic dora that's learning Subis, or a kollel that's learning Toyen V'Nitan. But let's try and see how it works out. So in many sources in Shas, Bava Metzia, Bava Kama, Bava Basa, Shuras, Ksubas, Yevomis, we're not. We find various sugyas of Migo. Apesha Osar, Hu Apesha Hito, Mare Shakar. Different formulations, different words, but the concept is the same. And in many sources in Shas we find when a man stands in basin and he voices an argument, which is not an acceptable argument, and by itself it should be rejected. But if he did have an option to voice another argument that would be acceptable, then we say, we believe what he says, even though it's not very convincing, not very compelling, but he could have achieved the same outcome by voicing a more acceptable argument, and therefore, yes, we believe what he says, and that is a Migo. Migo de Yochal Loimar Nesu Nemar Loimar Exact, or the other way around. He could say Porati. Therefore, he is never to say the shtar is mezuyaf. When a person has a signed document to aid him, we don't believe when someone says it's mezuyaf, it's forged. You've got to prove it's forged. But if he could say, I paid, then Migad Yochal Leima Mezuyaf Yochal Leima Porati. And in many different sources in Shas we find the concept of a Migo. And they go on Subis, Chov Beis Amid Beis, Chov Beis Amid Aleph, asks, Menolan, how do we know the concept of a Pesha Osar Hu HaPesha Yitiyom? And Chazal want to learn this from this week's parsha. Va'omar Aviyanar or Azekeinim es bitu notati leish hazeh leisho. So Chazal said when a father says es bitu notati leish asra, he just testified that he gave her away for kiddushin. So she's an eishes ish. When he says hazeh hitira. So it is from here that we learn the concept of a pesha osa hu a pesha hitira. And then the Gemara says, why do we need a posik? Svorei. It's a svor. Why do we need a posik? Twice in Shas do we find this formula. Romali kro. Svorei. Ksubas Chov Beis Amid Aleph. When Chazal speak about Migo, and Chazal say, how do we know the concept of a pesha osar or a peshet? And the Gemara wants to prove from this posik, and then the Gemara says, we don't need a posik. It's a poshet to svora. And once again, above Kam and then Vav Amid Beis, when the Gemara deals with the halacha, the concept of amoitzi mechaveri olav araya, maybe the most fundamental rule in Dina Mominis is amoitzi mechaveri olav araya koach hamuchzak. In modern language, I don't know in English, but in Hebrew, in modern legal terminology, haschut lehenot min hasafek. The benefit of doubt, yeah, I think probably there's a concept like that in English as well. The benefit of doubt, haschut lehenot min hasafek, hamoitzi mechaveri olav araya. And the Gemara says, how do we know this basic, fundamental halacha in Mominis, hamoitzi mechaveri olav araya? And the Gemara says, Mi bal davorim yigash alehem, and then the Gemara says lamali kro svorei. Isn't it a simple fundamental principle that we know from svara? I am muchzik. You are the one that has a claim. If you have a claim, you got to prove your claim. Otherwise, we say shevel taisodif. So twice in Shas, we find this phrase, this loshen, lama likro svari, which seems to indicate beyond doubt the svara is min haTorah to the degree that Chazal say we don't even need a drasha, we don't even need a posik. If it's a svara, what do you need more than a svara? So how do we understand the Gemara on the very first page in Keitzad Mevorchen and Masechet Brochas, when the Gemara says, how do we know that you got to make a bracha before eating, before partaking of food and drinks? And the Gemara says, Svari, Osel Odam Shehenem Yodam is Bali Brocha. And nevertheless, in Brochas Daf Chof, and it's simple in all the poskim that Berchas Adheden is Midrabon and it's not Min haTorah. I think I said some time ago there are only two brachas that are Min haTorah: Berchas Hamazon and Berchas haTorah. Berchas Adheden is the Rabbanon, but the Gemara says Svari. So is a svara min haTorah or a svara is not min haTorah? So how come in Keitzad Mevorchen when the Gemara says Svari Yosel Odam Shehenim Yodam is Bali Brocha, but it's still a Rabbanon? And regarding the two halachas, Peshosa or Peshahitio, Hamoitze Mechaver Olavaraya, the Gemara says, Lama Likra, why do we need a posik if it's a svara? Which seems to say that a svara is min haTorah. So in my sforum, I dealt with this question, and I wrote two tirutzim. And I'm not sure there are two. Maybe it's just a different approach and different expressions, but ba'oimek svara, maybe they're two sides of the same coin. And I say there are two types of svaras. There are svaras that stem from pure logic, common sense, and pure logic. That is min haTorah. A logical svara, a svara that stems from one's mind. And then there are svaras that come from the heart, not from the mind. It's not pure logic. It's your moral compass and your moral feeling, and they are different. So the two sugyas in which Chazal say Lama Likro Savorei are logic, pure logic. There's a muhsek and a moitzi. The moitzi is the one that has a claim. He demands or expects the Beis Din to take money out of the possession of the other party and transfer it to him. So if you have a claim, you got to substantiate your claim. You got to prove your claim. Otherwise, you cannot expect the Beis Din to initiate and to take money away from another person unless you convince us that this is a proper claim. That is pure logic. The same applies to Peshos or Peshahitio. But Osela Odam Shehenem Yodam Azeh Bli Brocha ze svara musarit. It's a moral svara. It is not logic. It is based on our relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu and the way we appreciate the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and we feel, it is our feeling that Osela Odam Shehenem Yodam Azeh Bli Brocha, that is not min haTorah, that is the Rabbanon. Approach number two, or interpretation number two, would be a svara is min haTorah. But the question is, what do you want to do with this svara? What do you want to do with this svara? A svara could be mechadash dinim. It cannot be mechadash mitzvahs. We got taryag mitzvahs. Eila hadavorim. Chazal say, af hanovi einoi yochol lachadash dover me'ato. Even a prophet cannot be mechadash mitzvahs. Eila hadavorim. Lo tosifan alayim v'lo tigra'u mehem. There's a lot of Lo Tosif and a lot of Bal Tigra. The list is closed. Chachomim have the authority to add on mitzvahs that are bonon, but not b'shem Hashem. And therefore, even a svara cannot be mechadash a mitzvah. Hamoitzi mechaber olavaraya is not a mitzvah. Penosh peshos or peshit is not a mitzvah. Berchas anenen is a mitzvah. So svara could be the uraisa. But it only goes so far as to be mechadash dinim. A svara cannot be mechadash a mitzvah. Eila hadavorim, even a novi, cannot be mechadash an additional mitzvah. And it makes no difference whether that novi wants to be mechadash a mitzvah by prophecy or by svara. Svara is min haTorah as long as we're mechadash dinim, but we cannot be mechadash mitzvahs, and they could only be in the status of a mitzvah derabanan, and they would not become a mitzvah d'oraisa. And I think both approaches and both hedgation are emes la'amito to be miyashiv. On one hand, in two sugyas, Chazal seem clearly to say, Svaras min HaTorah, to the degree that Chazal say we don't even need a drosha, lo likro Svarai. And on the other hand, the Gemara Mefureshes, Berchas Nanin is a Svara, that's the Lashon of the Gemara, Svarai, and Afar Pikenes Derabanan. Where else do we find the Svara that's min HaTorah? So I stand behind what I said. Only twice in Shas do we find the Lashon Lo likro Svarai. Number 3 is a sugya in Nida. But that's where the Gemara says, Lo likro Svara ba'alamai. And I don't want to go into length, but if you check that sugya, you will realize why in Ksubas and Bava Kama the Gemara says Svari, and in Nida the Gemara says Svari ba'almi, because they're different. But we all remember in Sanhedrin, the Fine Daled, when the Gemara asks, how do we know Gimel Avayas Chamurish Yeherag V'Aliyavar? So on Gili Arayas, Chazal bring the Posuk, and Avodah Zarah we learn from Gili Arayas. And when it comes to Shvichas Domim, what does Chazal say? Svari. Maichos is the Dome de Dachsu Miktvei, Dilme Dome de Deiso Miktvei. And it goes without saying that this is min HaTorah. This halacha must be min HaTorah. The din of Yehereg V'Al that cannot be the Rabbanon. And what is the origin of this svara? What is the rationale? Ma'achosas, yes, that is also logic. It's not musa, it is logic. Why do you think your life is more precious than his life? Life is life. So you have no right to take away another person's life to save your life. And that is in the status of a svara that's min HaTorah. It's not a mitzvah, it's a din. And this din stems from logic and not only from your moral feeling. So that is the way I reconcile the Gemara on Brochus, even though it's a svara. The Gemara says svara yosel odem shenim yaelim zeber yirlochot ba'berchus and then it's still midrabanan, contrary to the 3 other sugyas in which we see svaras d'oraisa. So up to this point I didn't speak about Migo, but this is an important introduction to the Shiur. When is svara min HaTorah and when is svara midrabanan? So as I said, many sources in Shas we find the concept of Migo. And Migo is basically the same as a Pesha Osir or Pesha Hitir. Slight difference. Pesha Osir is a situation in which he is the one that gives us the information upon which we could base a claim against him, and therefore he is the one that is also believed when his interpretation clears him from any claim against him. But it's the basic logic of Migo. So since we were little kids in Cheder and Yeshivik Tana, I hope it's still the same Yeshivik Tana. Today in Yeshivik Tanas they give the Talmidim all the lamdas that they give in Koilel. But when we were kids and we learned the sugya of Migo, our Rebbeim and the Malamdim used the most simple logic. If a person could make another argument and we would believe him, and he chose not to make that argument, which is more powerful, and he uses an argument which is less convincing, then probably he's a truthful person. Probably he's saying the truth, because if he is a crook and a liar and a cheat, then he probably would use a more convincing argument. And if this person does not present the most powerful argument, but a lesser one, then we trust that he's honest and he's truthful, and therefore we believe what he says. That is the way we always understood Migo. And that is Rashi, Ksubis, Yud Beis, Omed Beis. Rashi writes, Kushto Ka'omar. He is saying the truth. We find the same in Chuvas Rashba, Chele Gimel Simen Pei Aleph, and once again Shin Nun Gimel. And the Rashba clearly says, this person, if he wouldn't be honest, probably would present a far more convincing and powerful argument. He didn't do so, and therefore we assume he is saying the truth and we believe him. So that is clear in Rashi, as I quoted, Ksubas Yud Beis Amid Beis, Rashbam Bava Basalam Advar Amid Aleph, Tshuvas HaRash, Bo Chele Gimel Pei Aleph, Shinum Gimel, Tshuvas HaRash, Klal Ayin Tes, Siman Ches. And this Rosh is of special importance, and I'll tell you why. So the Rosh always also explains Migo. And a few sources in Shas, Chazal use an expression, Mali L'Shaker, which is explicit. Mali L'Shaker, if I would want to lie, I would have a more convincing argument. You would believe me if I would say that argument. But I'm truthful. Therefore I'm saying the truth, and that is why we believe him. And the Rosh explains Migi in that way. And at the end of the Shuv he writes, V'chein kol Migo shebetalmud al derech zeh. So remember these words. V'chein kol Migo shebetalmud al derech zeh. So we have Rashi and the Rashbam, the Rashba and the Rosh, and Shach, because the Shach is the greatest posek in Choshen Mishpat, and in Yeridea. Shach, Simen Pei Beis, we have Kitzur Klolei Migo. Klolei Migo are found in Choshen Mishpat Simen Pei Beis. Kitzur Klolei Migo. Ois Chavav. The Shach clearly explains Migo, exactly the way we learn Migo in the Chaygar. Till Rabbi Chonan and Rabbi Shimon came along. And the great Rosh Hashivas of pre-Holocaust generation, really the greatest Rosh Hashivas, Shehiru Pnei Tevel B'Torosam. And they have a different interpretation of Migo. Every yeshiva boy knows. Most of you probably have yeshiva background. Some of us had time to forget. But some things we just don't forget. Koyach HaTaina. And their interpretation, Migo, no, it's not that we believe him. This is as if a Hilchasa. Koyach HaTaina. If he could achieve anything with a different Taina, doesn't matter what Taina he brings up. He is entitled to those same achievements he would have by using a different argument. Then it's his privilege, his preference. Whatever argument you say, that is yours, because you could have achieved those rights with a different argument than as if they're yours, and that is Koyach HaTaina. But nobody knows how to explain what's the logic of Koyach HaTaina. Is there logic? There must be, because we're dealing with Dinei Arayos. And at the end of the day, the Gemara says it's not a posuk. It's not a Gzeis HaKosav. Lo Malikro Svori. So if Chazal say Svora, they got to be Svora. So what is the Svora? And why would we say, if he could achieve any rights, any monetary rights, any monetary achievements with a different Taina, then we totally disregard what his argument is. That is his. And why would that be? If the argument he is presenting is not an acceptable argument, it's not a reasonable argument, so if we don't believe he's saying the truth, then why would we give him those same rights? So one of the Choshev HaMachaberim, present-day Rosh Hashivas, writes that it's probably Halacha L'Moshe Messinai. Well, when you can't explain something, your only option is to say that it's Halacha L'Moshe Messinai, and therefore we don't need to explain it. But the Gemara says it's a Savara. It's not Halacha L'Moshe Messinai. And whenever we want to say that Halacha is based on Halacha L'Moshe Messinai, we need a source, either in Chazal or one of the earliest Rishonim, to say it's Halacha L'Moshe Messinai. But regarding Migo, the Gemara says it's a Savara, not Halacha L'Moshe Messinai. So what does Koyach HaTaina mean? And how do we explain this concept? Before Reb Shimon and Rabbi Chonan, and the great Rosh Hashivas of Lithuania, Dafka going back more than 100 years, one of the great Gedolim in Germany and in Galicia made a similar argument. Shalosh Hashuvas Ateres Chachamim. Most people today don't know who the Ateres Chachamim is, but that's the Baruch Tam. The Baruch Tam was the father-in-law of the Divrei Chaim, of the Tzan Zarov. He was the Roman Leipnik, but originally he was from Galicia. He was from Poland. A great God. And a Shalosh Hashuvas Ateres Chachamim. Even as a Siman Chaf. He is the first one that says, Migo, it doesn't necessarily mean that we believe he is truthful. But that is the halacha. He could have made a better argument, and therefore, yes, whatever he says, we give him the right of argument. However, when we examine carefully the wording of the Teres Chachamim, so at the outset of the paragraph of his argument, he says, when a person has a Migo, we believe him. And then he goes on to explain, is not necessarily because we know he's saying the truth, but that is the halacha. So he does say, we believe him. And then he says, it's a rule. I think we find in the Rambam and in the Shulchan Aruch a lashon that would strongly seem to substantiate what Rabbi Elchanan and Reb Shimon say. Could I have a Rambam Mishpoti? Or a Choshen Mishpot, Chelik Beis. Because the Shulchan Aruch quotes the Rambam in Siman Ayin Hey Sif Aleph. But the Rambam is the basic source, so let me read to you an interesting halacha in the Rambam. Tayin v'nitan Perek Vav halacha Aleph. The Rambam writes, and it's quoted in Choshen Mishpot, the very first sif in Hilchos Tayin v'nitan. בעלי דינים שבאו לבייס דין. טענה אחד ואומר מוני יש לי אצל זה שהלביסיהו, או שהפקדתי אצלו, או שגזל ממני, או שיש לו אצלי בסחורי, I worked for him and he didn't pay me. So the plaintiff, is that the word, a torveya? Yeah? I think a torveya is a plaintiff. So the claimant, or the plaintiff, says he owes me money, and he clearly says how he owes me money. I gave him a pekudin, I gave him a loan, he stole, I worked for him, and I wasn't paid. And the nitva, heishiva nitva va'omer, eini chayav lecho klum. And he's not willing to go beyond that. I owe you nothing. That is all he has to say. Beis turns to the nitva, and Beis Din says, Oimrim Beis Din lenitan, Hoshev al ta'anosei ve'pareshes atshuva kemo shepireshet ta'anosei. He made a very clear claim. He tells a story. So you cannot just say, I owe you nothing. We want you to explain why don't you owe. Did you pay him? Or he never worked for you? Did you steal and you compensated him, or you did not steal? We expect you to explain why you don't owe him anything. And then the Rambam writes an amazing line. Mipnei ma ein mekablen memeno tshuva zu. So why isn't it enough when he says, I owe you nothing? Shemu toyehu b'dato. Maybe he really honestly thinks he owes nothing, but if he'll tell the story, we will explain to him, no, you do owe him money. You mistakenly think you don't owe him. And then the Rambam writes, Lefichach oimrim loi, heach toimer eini chayev klum. Shema ata mitchayev min adin לשלם ואין אתה יודע. אלא הודיע לדיין עם פרש הדבורים. Please tell us the story and let us decide, do you owe him money or not? And if we see that he doesn't want to talk and he is afraid to talk, then we tell him, we see that the man is smart and he doesn't want to talk too much. He's afraid he's going to say something which will be detrimental to his case. And therefore, he doesn't want to talk too much because he might say something that will be used against him. ואפילו היו חכם גדול, אומרים לו, אין לך הפסד שתושב על טענוסוי, ותודיענו כיצד אין אתה חייב לו, מפני שלא היו דברים מעולם, או מפני שהיו והחזרת, שהרי הנדונים במתוך שיכולים בכל מקום. What do these 5 words mean? שהרי הנדונים במתוך שיכולים בכל מקום. So the Rambam says, we explain to the defendant, please be more precise, talk, tell us what the story is. Why do you think you don't owe him? You don't have to be afraid, because even if you're going to say something detrimental to your cause, it cannot be used against you, because you have a Migo. Sha'arei anudonim b'metoich shiyochaloima b'kol makom. במילים אחרות, בכל מקום אנחנו דנים במתוך שיכולים. We will give you all the rights that you could have had with any other argument. So even if you won't present your best argument, you won't be losing out. שהרי הנדונים במתוך שיכולים בכל מקום. And this lotion is called in Shulchan Aruch. Now, let us try to figure this out. It's quite clear that the person doesn't know, He doesn't know what is the best argument, and that is why he prefers not to talk too much. And we tell him, regardless, just tell us the true story. And even if you won't give us the best argument, you won't be losing out. We will always give you the benefit of any other argument you could have said. So in this case, we cannot say he proves to be honest because he isn't using another argument. He's confused. We see he's confused, and that's why he doesn't want to use any argument, because he doesn't know what to say. So therefore, what he's saying is, I deny, I owe him nothing. He isn't arguing anything argument. So it's obviously, he's confused, he doesn't know what's kedai to argue. And we tell him, you cannot lose out, because whatever argument you will say, unless it is clear that you are chayiv, but you won't be losing out. So this obviously proves the concept of koyach etana is not because we believe what he's saying, but rather this is his privilege. So how do we understand this halacha? I said before, we have Rashi and the Rashbam and the Rashba and the Rosh and the Shach. And they all explain what we always knew, since we learn in Cheder and in Yeshiva Tana. The concept of Migi says he's probably a doiver emes, because if he would be a liar, he would use another argument. So let me explain the concept of tainus. So when I learn in Kailol, Hilchas Toyin V'Nitten and Choshen Mishpat, I say the first Chiddush in Hilchas Toyin V'Nitten is the caption, the heading, Toyin V'Nitten. That is the greatest Chiddush in Hilchas Toyin V'Nitten. So, the great Rosh Hashivas in the past 100 years in Lithuania, dealing with Roiv, Chazaka, use 2 basic agdoras, birur or din. Anybody that learns in yeshiva remembers these agdoras. When we go basaroiv, is it a birur or gzeres hakosov? Chazaka is a birur or gzeres hakosov? To me, neither Rav nor Chazaka could neither be a birur or a gzeres hakosov. How could you call Rav or Chazaka a birur when every Rav has a miut? How could you say this is proof? How could it be proof? How could 60% be proof when the other side of 60% is always 40%? So how could you call Rav a birur or Chazaka a birur? Let me go to the extreme and say, in Torah there is no birur besides Shnei Eidim. That's all there is. That's the only birur. Because Shnei Eidim have the ultimate ne'emonus. And it is not because we know they're saying the truth. No, we don't know. But that is the din Torah. That Shnei Edom, after Drisha v'Chakira, have an amonos. Benefoshes, bemomoin, all the halachas across the board. That is the only bill. So how do we define Roiv? So the other possibility, according to the Rashivas, would be a din, Gzeres HaKosov. Rav is logical. In modern language, we call it histavrut statistic. Statistical likelihood, statistical reasonability. It's not the Gzeres HaKosov, which doesn't make sense. Every day in our lives, we go Bosarov. No? When you invest money, you want to see the statistics. When you go for a medical procedure, you want to see the statistics. So you go for an operation and they tell you 99%, 0.99, it's successful, then you feel comfortable. If they tell you, well, you have a 40% chance of making it through the operation, then you'll think not twice but 1,000 times. You won't do it. So every day in our lives, we, in practicality, azlinan bosaroiv. I mean, so it's not a gzeres hakosov kehilchas beloitama, but it cannot be defined as a birur. So what is roiv? What is chazaka? What is... So besides birur and din, there's a broad concept which is broader than birur and din gam yachad. Hanochas. In English, assumptions. When we assume something, we're not convinced it must be this way, but it's fair to assume. Rav is an assumption. If 90% of the time it turns out this way, then we assume this is probably what we're seeing. Chazaka is an assumption. So when we say Sokran ala Chazakas, Ish ve'ish, a man and a woman came to town, they'd be living here for a half year like husband and wife. So we weren't present at the Siddiq edition, we weren't at their chasana, we don't know who the Edom are here to testify, but they act and interact as husband and wife, and we assume they're husband and wife, and that is their halachic status. So in halacha, most of the dinim are not a birur, but hanochas, assumptions. Rav is an assumption, chazaka is an assumption. Most of these halachas are assumptions. Migo is an assumption. It's not a birur. How could we call Migo a birur? Most of the people out there, or many people out there, aren't smart enough or learned enough to know what is the most convincing argument, which is the argument Beis Din will accept, and the others that Beis Din would reject. But we assume that most people could figure out, or study, or ask, or inquire. Most people, when they come to Beis Din, know which arguments are acceptable and which are less acceptable, and therefore, if a person presents an argument which is not the best argument he could theoretically present, we assume he is truthful. It's not a birur. So in Lithuania, they quoted the Ilui of Meicha, who asked an interesting question. And it's a question that's fitting for an Ilui, not necessarily for a Gadol, but for an Ilui. So he said, Migo is a birur as long as you don't learn Bava Basra. But once you learn Bava Basra, and you know the secret that if you give a shvacha argument, they'll believe you because you could have given a better argument, then it's no longer convincing. So when he gives a shvacha argument, you say, he's probably saying the truth because he could have argued a better argument. No, but he learned Bava Basra Davlan and Beis. So he knows the secret that we'll always believe a person when he gives a shvacha argument. So there no longer is a Migo. So I say, yes, that's a distortion. It's only because somebody thought that Migo is a birur. It's an assumption. And we always assume that it is the nature of a person, even after he learned the Bava Basra. He would prefer to present the most convincing argument, nevertheless, even if he knows that with the shvach argument they believe him with the Migo. So Migo is an assumption. Most of the halachas in Mominus are assumptions, not a birur. The way I understand Torah, there is no birur in halacha besides Shnei Edom, because that's a case of when Edom testify, they have nemonos. Nemonos is a birur. Anything else cannot be defined as a birur, an assumption. And the entire realm of Toyin V'Nitten is hanachos, assumptions. How do we know that assumption has relevance? That is one of the greatest chidushim in Mominus. Because Chazal understand that Toras HaMomen cannot be based only on Eidim, neither Din and Nefoshes. It's almost 20 years that I'm an Av based in, and I don't remember one case that we decided of the Eidim Ksheir. Not one case in 20 years. We had thousands of Tikim. Why? Because in business dealings, there are never Eidim Ksherim. Who's in the room? This party or that party, the seller or the buyer. They're employees, family members. They're all posel Eidis. So, in which business dealings do we have Eidim Ksherim? Almost never. So when a person is mazik, usually it's v'yifin koi v'choy v'yar ki einish. Nobody is miyachad Eidim when he wants to break out the window of his friends. So in the modern world, especially in Israel, we suddenly discover kol masecho v'sefer nachtovim. There are surveillance cameras everywhere. But that is not Eidim. It's a sofa godel in halacha whether we will rely on surveillance cameras. So what I mean to say, the entire realm of Toyin V'Nitten is based on Tainus. And the origin of Tainus is the profound understanding of Chazal. We cannot base Dinei Rayas only on Eidim. Because in the vast majority of cases, whether it's Dina Nefoshes or Dina Mominus, we won't have Eidim Ksherim. So Chazal were Mechadesh, an entire system of Tainus and Hanochas, assumptions. So Beis Din must first try to be Mevarer. But when we do not have Rayas, the second line of defense, we fall back on Tainus. So there's an amazing Rashi in Ksubas Daf Tez Zayin, Bori V'Shema Bori Odif. Rashi explains, Manda Omar Bori V'Shema Bori Odif, Kroivo Tanos Eliois Emes. Kroivo Tanos Eliois Emes. We're not sure he's saying the truth, but we assume he's saying the truth. This Rashi proves that when we cannot achieve emes, then second best is koroiv emes. And Bori V'Shem is kroivo tanosoi liois emes. Yeah? He doesn't have ultimate nemonos because he's an agei b'davar. He's a Baal Din. But if one is Bori and the other is Shemo, it's a machloikis of Nachman and Rav Huna. But the one that says Bori V'Shem Bori Yodav, Kroivo Tanos Elios Emes. And we find a similar expression in Toises, Bob Metziyad Avdalad Amendalaf, and Moide B'Miktzes. Why is Moide B'Miktzes Chayiv Shavua and Ed Echod Chayiv Shavua? And Toises sees a similarity, a common denominator between Ed Echod and Moide B'Miktzes. They are the only two Shavuas the Uraisa. Moide B'Miktzes and Ed Echod. So Toises says when a person is Moide B'Miktzes, Nere Kimishaka. Toises doesn't say Mishaka. How could you say he's lying? Just because he's a Moide B'Miktzes? Maybe he's truthful. Nere Kimishaka. So when we don't have proof, when we don't have Eidim, there is significance in Nere Kimishaka. And that is the entire realm of Tainus. Tainus, Kroivo Tanos Eliois Emes, Nere Kimishaka, and it is only because Chazal understood we must have more tools. We must have more tools to do tzedek and mishpat. If the Torah requires us tzedek, tirdof, we cannot rely only on Eidim. We will almost never have Eidim Kshedim. We need more formulas and more tools. And that is when Chazal were mechadish the entire system of assumptions. And all the Tainus are assumptions. Kroivo Tanos Elios Emes. Nere Kimishakar. So, Migo is an assumption. We're not confident. We're not confident he's saying the truth. He might be dumb, and he doesn't know which are the best arguments. He might be such a smart aleck, like the Meitzer to Ili, and he says, well, if I'm going to give a schwach argument, they're going to believe me more than if I give a powerful argument. So, we cannot say in confidence he's saying the truth. But we don't have Adam, so it's reasonable to assume that he is saying the truth, and that is why we give him namanos, and that is why it's a machlokes whether Migo lahoitzi amrinen or not. So some Rishonim paskin that Migo is only lahachzik, but it's not strong enough to be moitzi. Dafke the Ramban, Bava Basa Lamed Beis, and Shuvas Arash Moshin in Gimel Achele Gimel say Migo mahana lahoitzi, because Migo is an assumption. And the machlokes says, how powerful is this assumption? Could it override muzik? Is it defined as a raya lagabe the din of amoitze mechavere olav raya? But basically, the way I understand Migo is an assumption. And because Migo is a taina, basically, Migo is, yes, we think he's saying the truth. We think. We assume. We're not sure. And therefore, it's a machlokes how powerful Migo is. Is Migo also enough to be moitzi moment, or just to be machzik moment? But once Chazal were kaveya the namonas of Migo, it achieves a life of its own. And even if in this specific case, there is no reason to assume he's saying the truth. We look at the faces of the people. It's not very convincing. He's not smart enough to figure out tinus. But when Chazal were kaveya Migo, it achieves a life of its own, and it is no longer dependent in this specific case. Is it convincing to assume that he's saying the truth? And that is the nature of tinus. So even if Beis looks around, and in this case, it's not very, we don't have the feeling that he's saying it, but that is the din. That is the din, Migo. And that is the way I reject the rayas of Go'one Basroi, Gedoyle Rosh Hashivas, to say that Migo is koyach hatayna. What's their raya? Gittin Daf Beis. Tosis explains, in a case in which the Yisoimim stand before Beis Din, and the Yisoimim don't know. Somebody has a claim against their father passed away. There's a concept of Taninan. Beis Din presents Tainus, B'mkoma Yisoimim. They're Ktanim. They don't know what to say. How would they know their father's dealings? So Tosis says, if the father had a Migo, Beis Din Tainus a Migo for the Yisoimim. So if Migo is a raya, then, well, the father ain't around. There is no raya. The way I understand Migo is a taina. Its origin is an assumption. But once Chazal were korveya the halacha of Migo, it is no longer dependent on the specific case. Do we seem to be convinced he's saying the truth or not? No. It achieves a life of its own, and it is no longer dependent on the degree of conviction which it reflects. So that is my understanding of the halacha of Migo, and it's the Yesod Godel. And the most important point of what we're discussing today is a new definition, a new agdara, which is far broader than number one and number two. Neither a birur nor a din. And so many halachas are hanachas. One of them, for instance, is a dos baldin kameyedim domi. The Tzoysa Choshim gets all complicated in Simon Amedalad and in Simon Peizayin. Is a dos baldin an amonos or a schayvis? And I say it's neither an amonos nor a schayvis. It's a hanacha. The Torah tells us that when a person is moided that he's chayiv, you assume that he's telling the truth. Otherwise, when he argues somebody else owes him money, we don't assume he's telling the truth. when a person admits that I owe money to others, the Torah says, stop here. We assume that he's telling the truth. When he admits that he owes money to others, why would a person lie when he says, I owe money to others? So it's not an amonus. There is no need for an amonus. It's an assumption. It's a hanacha. We assume he's telling the truth, and therefore Basin doesn't have to look for proof. You don't have to look for evidence. אתם פטורים מלהתעסק בדיני הראיות כשיש עדות בלדין. So עדות בלדין is not an amonus. The Ksais HaChoshen wonders, how do we know עדות בלדין overrides Edom? So Rashi writes in Kedushin Samach עדות בלדין אשר יום כי הוא זה. But how do we know it's more powerful than Edom? I say, it's not more powerful than Edom. But when there's עדות בלדין, we disregard Edom because there is no need. We don't look for evidence when we have עדות בלדין, and we assume that if a person says he's chayev, he probably is. So many halachos and dina rayas and dina momenes are hanochas. No bitter, no din. Assumptions. And these are very basic in dina rayas and in dina momenes. Migo is an assumption. He's probably telling the truth. We're not sure, but he's probably telling the truth. And that probability, that reasonability, is koivea halachas. And therefore, Migo b'mukamedim lo amrinan. Migo can't go against Edom, because Edom is proof. Migo is an assumption. So, the origin and the basic rationale of Migo is he's probably telling the truth. But once Chazal or Kaveh the amonas of Migo, it is no longer dependent on each and every case. And Basin has no authority to say, we will believe this person that has a Migi, and we won't believe another person that has the same Migo. No. It is no longer in our jurisdiction, and it is no longer for us to decide when we do believe, when we don't believe. But the basic rationale of Migo is an assumption. He's probably telling the truth. Because most people, when they come to Beis Din, would know which are the better arguments, which are the shvacha arguments, and most people will always prefer to present the best argument. And if this person is not presenting the best argument, we should assume he's probably telling the truth, and we should believe. So that is the aside of Migo, and we also touched upon many other concepts in Dina Momenis and in Dina Rayas, and this is a very fundamental discussion and a fundamental and the Shiur regarding Halacha that has its source in this week's parsha. So last week, Sunday night, was Motzei Rosh Chodesh Elul, and we spoke about Chodesh Elul and about the Remez Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li. Today I would like to discuss another Remez, which is also Mebeis Midrash Shel Ha'ari. Pri Eitz Chaim, Shar Rosh Hashanah, Perek Aleph. That he says, Echod Lechatos ve'Echod La'olam. And I think I said last week, some of us might foolishly think that where do all these Ramazim come from? Somebody had a lot of time and he was somewhat bored and he took out a Tanakh. And he just went through Tanakh, and whenever he found a posik that has a sequence of 4 letters, Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed, he made a note, and at the end of the day he compiled a lot of Ramazim on Elul. No, Chas v'Sholem. This Remez, as the other one, Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li, appears in Kisvei Ha'ari, and that he was the king of the Mekubolim, called the Vora of Gachal Yesh. So what is the Remez of Echod Lechatos, Echod La'olam? And I think once again it's a profound Remez about Chodesh Elul. So as I said last week, Elul is a gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. Take advantage of Chodesh Elul, because Yemei Adin start Rosh Hashanah. Elul is Kulei Rachamim. It's not yet Yemei Din. So Elul is the time to be Ma'or Rachamei Shamayim and to achieve closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Elul is a gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us ba'av, o kindalach, come together, come back to me. I don't want to be angry with you. I want to be a father and not a king. So take advantage of Chodesh Elul. Echod lechatos ve'echod le'olam. So in Zvochim, Dav Zayin mit Beis, Omer Reb Shimon, chatos lamo bo. And the Gemara wonders, lamo bo lechaper. We know why a person brings a chatos. You're over on a lav, you bring a chatos. Elo, lamo bo lefnei oilo. Why does the chatos come before the oilo? Moshel lepraklit shenechnas. Ritzu hapraklit nechnas doiron acharov. Person wants to have an audience with the king, and he wants to present the king with a gift. Whether it's produce from his field, or something as an artist he made. So, doesn't go without saying, it's not so natural that anybody could come into the king and so you need to find somebody that the king loves, and he should go in before you and appease the king and tell the king, I have a friend waiting outside and he has something beautiful that he made, and would the king be kind enough just to give him a few minutes, give him an audience and say thank you. So that is why chatas comes before oilo. Chatas bola ratzois. Because we have avoinus, we have avedus. You're not fitting to stand before the king. So first we send in the praklit, and he is meratza, he appeases the king. V'nechnes doiron acharov. And that is why the pasuk says echod lechatos ve'echod le'oilo. So the chatos comes before the oilo. The oilo is the gift. And that is why oilo is koli. The entire oil goes on the mizbeach. So the oilo, korb moil, is the ultimate gift. What is the chatas about? The chatas is about kapora. We should be fitting that a Kodesh Baruch Hu should want to accept our gifts that we come to offer. And that is what Elul is about. So Elul Bula Ratzos, that when Rosh Hashanah comes and we blow shofar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be mekabel, berachamim uvarotzoin, Seder Malchu Yoseinu, Seder Zechron Yoseinu, Seder Shofar Yoseinu. So the Ria Kodesh says, Chodesh Elul, the remez is Echod Lechatos ve'Echod Le'Elu. And like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says in Psuchim in Zvochim Dav Zayin, why does the chatas come before the oilo? Because koidim nechnas apraklit leratzois v'nechnas doiren acharov. That is the same. It is the same relationship between Elul and the Yom Meron, Aseres Yemei Tshuva. So Elul bo leratzois, and after the ritzui we have a pischon peh. Do you know why we say the posek Hashem Sefosai Tiftach Ufi Yaget Elosecha before every Shmoyne Esra? Why? So it's a Gemara actually, but the Gemara doesn't explain. Neither does Rashi explain why do we say this posek before each and every one of the three tefillas we daven every day. So Rashi in Tehillim, Hashem Sefosai Tiftach Ufi Yaget Elosecha, Rashi says, Kaper mechoyle avenoisai kedei shieli pischun pelefonecho. When a person stands before a Kodesh Baruch Hu, Mesadesh Baruch Shel Mokem, and how do we have a pischun peh? Are we fitting? Are we fitting? Do we deserve this audience? Do we deserve that a Kodesh Baruch Hu should be willing to see us? And that is why first we say the posek Hashem Sefosai Siftach Ufi Yaget Elosecha mechoyle avenoisai. And that is why the chatas comes before the oilo, because you want to bring a gift to the king. Why do you think he would be interested in your gifts? Not everybody could just walk into the king and have his precious time. So first you sent in the praklit, and he is meratze v'nechnas doiren acharov, and that is the Ria Kodesh interpretation of Chodesh Elul. So before Yemei Hadin, Memash Mishin Veboim and Rosh Hashanah, Se'es Yemei Tshuva and Yom Kippur, Elul is Ritzui. Elul is Rachamim. And Elul is Maratza, that we should have this Pischoy Peh. So last week, if you remember, we spoke about Shoichad and what a terrible Aveda it is. But there is only one Shoifet that takes Shoichad and he has no qualms about it. He's not even ashamed about taking Shoichad. And that is Shoifet Kol Haaretz. And that's a posik in Mishlei. In Mishlei, Perek Yud Zayin, the Shoiched Mechek Roshoim Yikach Lahatois Orchois Mishpot. V'shoiched mechek rashoim yikach lahatis orchos mishpat. And Rashi says that posik is about a Kodesh Baruch. So a Kodesh Baruch would take shoichad, and it's quite obvious what we're doing. Elul, isn't that shoichad? Why are we trying to appease a Kodesh Baruch Hu Elul? It is just because we have a case coming up, a court case. Yeah. Rosh Hashanah shoifet kol haaretz hayoim. We all stand lemishpat. So Elul, we start sending gifts. You didn't do the same of, or Tammuz, or Shvat, or Iyar, or Nisan. You didn't do that all year round. Mayoim. What happened? Well, we have a mishpat, and that's why we're trying to be better. That's blatant shoichad. So Kodesh Baruch Hu takes shoichad. But just 3 weeks ago in Parshas Eikev, we read a pasuk where Keila Godel Agiba Vaynoro Asher Lo Yisaponim V'Lo Yikach Shoichad. So how could Sefer Mishlei contradict Toras Moshe? Asher Lo Yisaponim V'Lo Yikach Shoichad. And in Mishlei the pasuk says V'Shoichad Mechek Roshoim Yikach Lahates Orchos Mishpot. Rashi writes Lahates Orchos Mishpot Lahafach Dinam Merol Toivo. Does he take shoichad or does he not? So my teretz is this. Choshe Mishpot Simentes. Shulchan Aruch writes, and it's based on the Gemara Ksubas Kufay Omid Aleph. The Yisr of shoichad is not only the zakos is a chayiv, even the zakos is a chayiv. If a dayan or a shoichad takes a bribe and he promises the person that gave the money, I'm going to paskin in your favor, then he's a Rosh Gomer, he is over on the Lavloi Sata Mishpot. Not only the Lavloi Sikach Shoichad, he's a Rosh Gomer. The Yisr of Shoichad is even when the Dayan says, I will be impartial. Don't expect me to paskin Shelo Kedin. I'm pocketing the money, and thank you, I appreciate it, but I'll give you no favors. I will paskin Afi Halacha. That is also an Yisr. But by a Kodesh Baruch Hu, lezakos is a zakai who takes shoichad, lezakos is a chayiv, no. So Rashi writes in Parshas Eikev, Ukeil agodel agiba v'anoiro asher lo yisapone v'lo yikach shoichad ef shel afaisoi b'momen. You can't bribe him with money. How does Rashi explain the posuk in Mishlei? It's the same Rashi. V'shoichad mechek rashoim yikach. Rashi says, when we come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'hachno u'b'tfila, then he takes shoichad. Perek Yud Zayin in Tehillim, there's a beautiful medrash Tehillim shoichad toiv. David HaMelech says, milfonecho mishpoti yetze. David HaMelech turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he says, please judge me. I want you to be my shoifet. Milfonecho mishpoti yetze. So Kodesh Baruch Hu tells David HaMelech, why are you coming to me? That's what the Sanhedrin is for. Go to the Sanhedrin. David says, I can't go to the Sanhedrin because they don't take shoichad. They're tzaddikim. They adhere to what you said, lo yisikir shoichad. That's why I come to you. David HaMelech tells the Kodesh Baruch Hu, don't send me to the Sanhedrin. They don't take shoichad. That's why I come to you. You do take shoichad. That's in Mishlei. So please, I want you to be my judge. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, please. Omer Reb Levi, what is the shoichad HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes? Tshuva, tefillah, u'tzedakah. That's different. Asher lo yisapona v'lo yikach shoichad. Rashi writes, ef shalafai b'momen. So let's talk about two different people. One is not showing a Torah. Machal al Shabbos, Taharas al-Mishpocha is not really, he's not serious about it. Doesn't daven, doesn't put on tefillin, but he says, I give $1 million a year charity. I have nothing to be afraid of. Kodesh Baruch Hu won't hurt me. I give $1 million a year charity. Kodesh Baruch Hu says, no, you have a terrible mistake. You can't bribe me. Your money doesn't mean anything to me. But the other person also gives $1 million a year charity. But when it comes El, he's very worried and heartbroken because he knows that he's giving tzedakah, but he has a lot of other issues to deal with. So he does tshuva, and he's marbe b'tefillah, tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, L'zakois is a zakai. Yes, that is the shoichet I take. L'zakois is a zakai. V'shoichet mechek rasho amikach lahatoi sorches mishpot. If he isn't just coming with money, tshuva, tefillah, it's tzedakah, yes, that is the shoichet HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes. So I remember a story my father used to tell me many times. I remember it first when I was a little boy. So my father was very close to the Kloisenberg Rebbe, was also my Rebbe, and I had the schus to be mishamash and learn from him. And he was a giant. So my father was very close to the Rebbe, and he also helped out in fundraising here and there. So once he brought an acquaintance of his, a big Oisher, who wasn't from, and he brought him to the Rebbe to give a donation. And the Rebbe starts talking to him about his personal life, about Shabbos, about davening, about Ta'as HaMishpocha, about different things. He was very offended and taken aback. I mean, why? This is my personal issues. Why do you nag me? I just came to give money. And my father was very hurt by the Rebbe's conduct. At the end of the conversation, the Rebbe said, I don't need your money. I don't want your money. Take whatever you wanted to give me, take it and give it to anyone else. You're not from, and you should be keeping Shabbos. And he gave him a musa shmuz. And he left the room very angry. And then my father came into the Rebbe and asked him, why did you do this to me? You know, this is a person I brought with high hopes, and he expected to get a lot of covet because he was ready to give a lot of money. So why did you do this? So the Rebbe told my father, well, I know that he's not going to do tshuva tomorrow because the other day he's going to go to another Rebbe and to another yeshiva, and everywhere he comes he's going to have kovet malachim, and he's going to be the greatest guy in town, and there might be a line of 100 people, but he will be taken to the front of the line and given a lot of kovet. But maybe 30 or 40 years from now, when he'll be on his deathbed, and then people think back, and he might remember there was one Rebbe many years ago that told me that I don't have to worry, that it doesn't go without saying that my money will open Sharik in Eden, and if I'll have a hira tshuva then, he's a schori. That's what the Kloisenberg Rebbe said. So I'm sure that my musa will have no effect now because he's getting so much covered wherever he goes. He'll just say, that's a crazy Rebbe, an angry Rebbe, he's off track. But maybe years from now, when you will be al Erez Devai, and you will make some sort of a cheshbon and nefesh, at least somebody told him along the way that he has no guarantee. That with all the money that he's giving, he still has what to worry about. And if he'll do tshuva then, he's a schori. That's what the Kloisenberg Rebbe said. So Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't take shaychat if all you have to offer is money. But when a person comes before Kodesh Baruch Hu, not only being so arrogant and proud about the charity that he's giving, but tshuva and tefillah and tzedakah, and Rashi writes in Mishlei with hachnoah, standing before Kodesh Baruch Hu and pleading and saying, Rabboni Shalom, I'm trying to be better, And that is the shaychet we give Chodesh Elul, not with arrogance, but with Shivran Leiv and with Achnoah and Tshuva. and we come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and we say, yes, the reason we're better is because we have a mishput. Yeah, and we admit, yes, that's a fact. We cannot deny that. We weren't the same last month or 2 months or 3 months or 6 months or 8 months ago. So it's quite obvious, Rabbeinu Shalom, the reason we look like we're trying to look is just because we know that we're having a judgment, we're having a mishput, but we do try to be better. So this is L'Zakoi Sisa Zakai, and in those occasions, so let's try to be better. Let's take advantage of Chodesh Elul, trying to come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and hoping that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take our shoichad and he should judge us l'toivo berachamim uvechesed, and we should be zoicha leikosav v'leichosam b'sifon shel tzadikim gemurim lebona l'chaya l'mezoina to good health and happiness, and we should have a shnas simcha and shnas oiro and a shnas geula v'yeshua b'meiro v'yameinu.